The sun was slipping behind the trees, bleeding orange and gold into the prairie sky as Clara Jennings tightened her shawl around her shoulders. Evening always brought a chill, but tonight the wind seemed different, uneasy, whispering through the grass like it carried secrets. She had just finished feeding the chickens when she heard it. A sharp thud. Then a rustling like something, or someone, dragging across the dirt. Clara froze. Her cabin sat miles from the nearest neighbor, and it wasn't uncommon for injured animals to collapse near her barn. Still, something about the sound made her heart pound. She grabbed her old shotgun from the porch and crept toward the barn. The doors creaked open under her hand, revealing shadows and hay, and then a shape. A man. Half covered in dust and blood, he lay slumped against the barn wall, his chest bare and heaving. His skin, bronzed by sun and wind, was marked with scratches and bruises. Raven-black hair clung to his sweat-damp face, and a single eagle feather was tied into one braid. Clara gasped. Not just a man of Lakota, and not just any Lakota, a warrior. She should have run, should have called for help. The town didn't take kindly to Lakota roaming this close to settler land, especially after recent tensions. But something in the stranger's face stopped her. Even wounded, he radiated strength. Pain tightened his jaw, but his eyes, half-lidded and fevered, still locked on hers with haunting clarity. "Please," he rasped, voice barely a whisper. "Water." Clara didn't move at first, then instinct kicked in. She lowered the shotgun, hurried to her kitchen, and returned with a ladle of cool water. His hand, broad, calloused and trembling, reached up, and for a moment their fingers brushed. Up close, she saw the severity of his wounds, a deep gash across his ribs, angry, bruises on his shoulder and thigh, and old scars that told stories she'd never know. His entire left side was coated in dirt and dried blood. He had likely collapsed after days of fleeing, but from what? He needed help. Now. Clara dragged his heavy frame into the back room of the barn onto a pile of hay softened with old quilts. She ran for her medical supplies, what little she had left since her late husband's illness. When she returned, he hadn't moved, but his eyes followed her. No fear, just silent awareness. She poured whiskey on a cloth and pressed it to the gash on his ribs. His body jerked. "Shh," she murmured. "You're lucky I'm a widow. Most folks wouldn't even give you a sip of water." A ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Clara worked quickly, cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight. She stitched the torn flesh on his shoulder with trembling fingers, doing her best to hide how close she was to panic. Every time she looked at him, his sculpted torso rising with each breath. The strength. Beneath the bruises, the tribal marks inked across his chest, she was reminded that this man was no ordinary traveler. He was dangerous. And beautiful. And broken. After an hour, his breathing steadied. She brought him a damp cloth to cool his brow and sat beside him, watching as sleep overtook his tense frame. "Who are you?" she whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. He didn't answer, but his lips moved ever so slightly. She thought she heard the word Wakanyan, thunder being. A name? A spirit? Clara didn't know what it meant. All she knew was that this man wasn't just another warrior. There was something regal about him, even in pain. Something untamed. Something ancient. As night fell, she couldn't bring herself to leave him alone. She lit a lantern, pulled up a stool, and stayed by his side. The wind howled outside, and the stars blinked above the prairie, silent witnesses to the stranger who had entered her life like a shadow and would change it forever. She didn't know that in saving him, she had just bound herself to the fate of 1,000 warriors and to the heart of a chief who had never bowed to anyone. Until now, the morning sun crept slowly over the prairie, casting a warm golden light across the barn floor. Clara stirred from her uncomfortable seat beside the stranger. Her back ached, and her shawl had slipped from her shoulders during the night. But her eyes immediately went to the man lying on the makeshift bed of hay and quilts. He was still alive. His breathing was steadier now, deeper, and the fever that had flushed his cheeks had broken sometime in the early hours. Beads of sweat clung to his collarbone and chest. His skin gleamed in the light, marked with old scars, new bruises, and tribal ink patterns she dared not interpret. Clara brought a fresh bowl of water and a cloth, kneeling beside him. As she dipped the cloth and pressed it gently to his forehead, he stirred. His eyes fluttered, open, dark, deep, and alert. "You stayed," he murmured. She swallowed hard. "Of course I did." For a moment their eyes held. Then he glanced down at his bandaged side and slowly tried to sit up. "Don't," Clara warned, placing a hand lightly on his bare chest. "You'll rip your stitches." His skin was hot beneath her fingers, his muscles tightening instinctively under her touch. He stopped moving but didn't move her hand away. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly, "but you nearly died. You still might." "I won't," he said. "You saved me." Clara sat back on her heels, studying him more closely in the morning light. He had high cheekbones and a strong jaw, and though his hair was matted and his body weak, there was a quiet power in him like a coiled wolf resting before a hunt. "I need a name," she said, reaching for the bowl again. He hesitated. "Call me Hawk. That's not your real name." "No," he paused. "But it's the only one I'll give, for now." Clara wasn't surprised. She wasn't a fool, she knew that. Lakota didn't trust easily, especially not the white folks who'd driven them from their land. And yet, here he was, alone, injured, and unarmed. He had nothing left to hide behind except the pride in his voice. She wrung out the cloth and cleaned the blood that had dried along his side. Each time she touched him, his muscles flinched, not from pain, but from restraint, like he was holding something back. Clara tried to stay focused on the wounds, but her eyes kept drifting. The way his abdomen rose and fell, how his long hair fanned over the hay, how his lips pressed into a firm line when he winced. "Were you running from someone?" she asked. He didn't answer. Just turned his face away. Clara sighed. "The town's already nervous. Sheriff's been talking about Lakota riders spotted near the ridge. I don't want any trouble." His eyes flicked back to her, sharper this time. "If they're near, I won't bring harm to your home." That wasn't exactly comforting. Still, something told her he wasn't lying. After washing the last of the blood from his arm, Clara brought over a clean blanket and gently draped it across his chest. "I'll bring you broth. If you can keep it down, we'll talk more later." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "You're not afraid of me?" Clara paused at the door. "I've buried a husband, a child, and half a dozen dreams. Fear doesn't hold the same weight it used to." He said nothing, but his gaze followed her as she walked away. Back in the cabin, she lit the stove and began heating broth, her hands shaking slightly. She had just offered shelter to a wounded Lakota, warrior, possibly even a scout. She could be tried for harboring him, shot, worse, but in her bones, she didn't believe he meant her harm. She glanced out the window toward the barn. Whatever secrets he carried, Clara knew one thing already. He wasn't just some wounded man crawling in from the wild. He carried presence. Command. And somewhere beneath those scars and silence, power. By the third day, Hawk was on his feet. Not for long and not without effort, but enough to leave. Clara staring in disbelief as he moved silently around her barn like a shadow made flesh. He should have still been fevered and weak, but instead, he paced barefoot across the straw floor, shirtless and focused, his long hair damp from a fresh wash, his wounds neatly dressed beneath clean bandages. "Your healing is unnatural," Clara muttered, handing him a cup of water. "You should still be flat on your back." He drank, eyes steady. "My people do not stay down long." She believed it. Even injured, Hawk carried himself like someone born to lead. His shoulders were broad and unyielding, his arms marked with years of warrior's toil-bow scars, blade. Scars, even what looked like ceremonial markings, burned faintly into his skin. Clara had tended to her husband through sickness, and she'd seen real pain. But Hawk didn't groan. He didn't complain. He breathed through agony like it was part of him. What struck her most wasn't his strength, it was his stillness. He was never idle, always listening, watching. When a wagon passed on the far ridge, he paused mid-step and tilted his head like a wolf scenting danger. When Clara's dog barked twice, only twice, he immediately moved to the back of the barn, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "You act like you're being hunted," Clara said that evening, leaning against the stable wall as he stretched, his injured shoulder in slow, methodical motions. "I'm not," Hawk said, lowering his arm. "Not anymore. You're sure?" He turned to her. In the golden light, his bare chest shimmered with sweat. She looked away quickly. "Yes," he said. "But they watch, always." "They?" "My warriors," Clara blinked. "You said you were alone." "I was, then." Now he didn't explain what he meant by then. And Clara didn't ask. But her gut twisted. Something about the way he said "my warriors" unsettled her. She thought back to the eagle feather tied into his braid, the ritualistic burn scar over his collarbone, the way he spoke only when necessary and with a certain weight. Like he was used to being heard and obeyed. Hawk wasn't just a fighter, he was a leader. "Why did you come this way?" she asked softly. "You had to know a settler woman would be more likely to shoot than shelter you," he shrugged, eyes distant. "I was bleeding. I followed the smoke. I smelled bread." Clara laughed before she could stop herself. "You chose." "My home over bread," she teased. "Either you were desperate or stupid, or both." Their eyes met again. And just for a heartbeat, she saw it. Not the warrior, not the leader, but a man. Tired, alone, grateful. "I'm still here because of you," he added, voice low. She cleared her throat, uncomfortable with how his words warmed her chest. "You'll be well enough to leave by week's end," she said, breaking the moment. "There's a trail south. If you avoid the river crossing, you can bypass the town." He stepped closer. Not threatening, never threatening, but close enough she could feel the heat of his bare skin, smell the mix of earth and fire that clung to him. "You want me gone?" She hesitated. "I want you safe, and I want to stay alive." He nodded. Slowly, "You saved my life. I will remember that." Then, just as silently, he turned away, returning to the stall where he'd been sleeping. But Clara couldn't look away. His words, "I will remember that," lingered like an oath, a vow, and deep inside she had the sudden, frightening feeling that whatever Hawk was hiding wasn't just dangerous, it was monumental, and her quiet life would never be the same. That night, the wind turned cold. Clara lit a small fire in the hearth of the cabin while Hawk sat just outside on the porch steps, bare-chested beneath a wool blanket draped over his shoulders. He hadn't said a word in over an hour, just stared out into the prairie, listening. Watching Clara brought him a bowl of rabbit stew. He didn't flinch when she sat beside him. "I'm surprised you haven't vanished into the trees yet," she said, her voice light. Hawk accepted the bowl. "And leave a warm fire?" "No," she smiled softly. "I didn't think a warrior would be so tempted by stew and firelight. I've slept in snowdrifts, eaten raw roots, watched brothers bleed in silence." He turned to her, his voice quieter now. "Warmth is not weakness." Clara studied his face in the flickering glow. He looked even more striking by firelight, his high cheekbones catching the orange hue, his dark eyes reflecting flame, unreadable but intense. He had tied his long hair back loosely, and a single strand had fallen against his cheek. "I didn't mean to insult you," she said. You didn't. His gaze lingered. You speak without fear. Most would have let me die. Clara's breath caught. I almost did. You didn't. She looked away, unsure what to say. The fire cracked between them. Hawk set the empty bowl aside and slowly stood, his silhouette tall and powerful against the night sky. He pulled the blanket tighter, his broad shoulders bare beneath it. "Do you regret saving me?" he asked. "No," Clara said, too quickly. "But I don't understand what this is. You're a stranger. And yet, I don't feel afraid." He stepped closer, stopping just in front of her. "Because you see me," Clara's heart pounded. "I see a man who could crush me with one hand." Hawk leaned down slowly. His voice was low and warm. "You see a man who won't." There. Faces were inches apart now. The wind tugged gently at her hair. His breath was soft on her skin. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then, deliberately, Hawk bent lower and brushed his lips to hers. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't rough. It was careful, full of restraint, a question more than a demand. And when Clara didn't pull away when her fingers curled into the edge of his blanket, he deepened it. Just for a heartbeat longer, and then it was over. He pulled back. His eyes searched hers, not for lust, but for permission. For something deeper. A place to land. Clara's throat tightened. She stood abruptly and stepped back. "I need to check the fire," she whispered. Retreating inside the cabin, Hawk remained outside, unmoving. Watching, Clara leaned against the closed door, her heart pounding like a drum. The kiss had awakened something she thought had died long ago. Desire, yes, but also trust, danger, mystery, and something else. Hope. But what scared her most was the feeling that Hawk hadn't kissed her just because he wanted to. He had kissed her because he already knew he wouldn't leave, knew that something bigger, something unstoppable was already moving toward her cabin like thunder on the plains. Clara woke to silence, but it wasn't peace. The fire had burned low in the hearth. Morning light spilled through the window, pale and cold. Something in the air felt off, too still. She dressed quickly, tugged on her boots, and stepped outside, expecting to find Hawk seated on the porch or tending the horses. He wasn't there. Her breath caught. The barn was empty. His blanket was gone. The straw bed, undisturbed. Fear prickled her spine. Not fear for herself, but for him. She scanned the horizon. Then she saw him, standing on the ridge behind her house, silhouetted against the rising sun. Bare-chested once again, though the wind was sharp, Hawk stood tall, completely still, his long hair rippling behind him. He wasn't just watching the land. He was listening to it. Clara stepped closer, boots crunching lightly on the frost-bitten grass. When she reached him, he didn't turn. His eyes were fixed on something beyond her view. "What is it?" she asked, breathless. He finally spoke. "They're near." "Who?" "My warriors." Clara's chest tightened. "They followed you?" "No." His voice was low, calm. "I summoned them." She stared. "What do you mean, you summoned?" Hawk raised his hand slowly and pointed toward the northern ridge. Smoke. Thin trails. 3 distinct plumes rising into the pale sky in sharp signals. Clara had lived long enough on the edge of Lakota territory to recognize that was no accidental fire. It was communication. "You signaled them," she said slowly. "Last night?" Hawk finally turned toward her. His face was no longer guarded, no longer silent or uncertain. It was the face of a man who had stopped hiding. "I told you my name was Hawk," he said. "That was only part of it." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I am Vicasa, he continued, son of the great elk chief, leader of the Oglala war band. I left to protect my people from betrayal, but they followed. They always do." Clara stumbled back a step. The name, the title. It struck like lightning in her chest. Vicas Atanka. Sacred Man was no scout, no common warrior. He was a chief, not just of a few men, but of an entire tribe. One of the most feared and respected in the West. And she had taken him in, tended his wounds, kissed him. You should have told me, she whispered. He looked down at her, unreadable. Would you have helped me if I had? Clara didn't answer. From the ridge behind him, motion stirred. Dozens of shadows, horsemen appearing silently through the trees. Proud, tall, and painted for battle or ceremony, they rode without speaking. Their eyes found her, but their hands didn't reach for weapons. Not yet. They were waiting for a command, waiting for him. Hawk stood taller, every inch of his body a silent declaration of power. He said nothing, but his presence spoke louder than war drums. Clara couldn't move. This man, the wounded stranger she'd pulled from the dirt, the shirtless warrior who kissed her by firelight, was no longer a mystery. He was a ruler, and the fire she had lit inside him had summoned an entire nation. The air had changed. It wasn't just the cold creeping in through Clara's windows or the wind rattling the shutters. It was a pressure, a tension rolling down from the hills like thunder before a storm. By midday, the town had noticed the riders, not just one or two Lakota scouts, but full silhouettes moving along the ridgeline, silent, deliberate, and unmistakably close. The smoke signals that had gone up that morning hadn't gone unanswered. Now the prairie watched and whispered. Clara had barely stepped onto her porch when she heard. OTOOFBEATS. Sheriff Talbot rode hard and angry, a shotgun strapped across his saddle and dust clinging to his worn leather duster. Two deputies flanked him, eyes sharp and scanning. He didn't wait for pleasantries. You've seen anything strange? He barked, eyes narrowing at her as he dismounted. Any movement? Tracks? Smoke? Clara steadied herself. Just the wind. Don't play dumb, Clara. A rancher south of here spotted Lakota riders an hour ago. Close enough to count the feathers in their war bonnets. They're not passing through. They're watching us. They haven't harmed anyone, she said calmly, yet. The sheriff climbed her porch steps and looked her square in the face. You live out here alone. We've all offered help, and you've turned it down for years. That was your right. But if you're harboring one of them, I'm not. It wasn't a lie. Not now. Hawk was gone from her barn. His warriors had taken to the ridges. If he had returned, it wasn't through her door. But Talbot didn't believe her. His eyes roamed the property, the barn, the shed, the edge of the woods beyond the horses. He stepped closer. Be careful, Clara. These men don't forget kindness. And they sure as hell don't forget betrayal. His words hung heavy in the air, a warning wrapped in threat. I haven't betrayed anyone, she said softly. He snorted. Don't make me come back with more men. Then he turned and rode. Off, dust cloud trailing behind him. Clara didn't breathe until the sound of hooves vanished into the distance. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the porch rail. She'd faced sickness, grief, loneliness, but this felt different. This was war creeping toward her doorstep. And in the middle of it all was Hawk. That evening, just after sunset, he returned stepping from the trees like a spirit. She knew it was him even before he reached the porch. The way he moved. The air around him seemed to still. His long hair was tied back with leather, his chest half covered in ceremonial beads and painted lines. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was a chief in full truth and bearing, and he had come back to her. Clara met him on the porch, her breath catching as he approached. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. The sheriff came. He knows some things. Not right. I know, Hawk said. She looked him over. You knew they'd come, didn't you? That your people would find you. Yes, I left signs. I didn't expect to be wounded before they reached me. And now they wait, she sighed, watching from the hills, making the town nervous. They'll come for blood if you give them a reason. I don't want blood, he said softly. "I want peace." "Then why come back to me?" Hawk stepped closer. "Because I made you a promise. You saved me. That debt is not repaid by." Walking away, she swallowed. "And what do you owe me, Hawk?" He didn't answer with words. He pulled something from the pouch at his waist, a carved piece of bone, shaped into a feather, strung on a simple cord of rawhide. He placed it in her palm, then closed her fingers around it. "This," he said, "is worn only by the wife of a chief." Clara froze. It wasn't a proposal, not in words. It was a declaration. He was offering her not just protection, not just gratitude, but place, status, a bond. "I can't," she began. But he stopped her with a look. "I will not force you. But if you walk with me, they will not touch you. My people will know you are sacred. You gave life. Now they will give it back." She looked down at the token in her hand. Her old life, quiet, controlled, broken, had already ended the moment she pulled his bloody body from the barn floor. She just hadn't realized it yet. And now, standing beneath the starlight, the wind pressing against her skin, she felt it, the pull of something wild, ancient, and true. She had once been a farmer's wife, a mother, a widow. Now she was being offered something entirely new. Not survival, but power. Not comfort, but freedom. And maybe love. The next morning, Clara rode into town for the first time in weeks. She wore her usual plain dress, boots caked with dust, hair tied back in a low knot, but her heart was anything but calm. Tucked beneath her shawl, on a leather cord against her chest, lay the carved bone feather Hawk had given her. It rested over her like a secret brand. As she reached the general store, she could feel eyes on her. The townsfolk stood in tight little clusters, farmers, wives, traders, talking in low voices, glancing often toward the northern hills. Everyone had seen the smoke signals. Everyone had heard the rumors. And now, everyone seemed to look at Clara differently. "Morning," muttered Mr. Ellis, the storekeeper, not meeting her eyes. Clara nodded silently and picked up the few things she needed: flour, coffee, dried meat. But when she reached the counter, she felt it, the tension thick in the room. Sheriff Talbot stepped through the door behind her. "You seen him again?" he asked. Clara turned slowly. "Who?" "You know damn well who." His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp as barbed wire. "They're still up there, watching. Your land's the closest." Clara held his gaze. "They haven't harmed anyone." "They haven't yet," he snapped. "But they've been riding that ridge for days now. That's no hunting party. That's a war council." The townsfolk murmured behind her. Someone whispered, "She's protecting one of them." Another voice, "She's with them." Sheriff Talbot leaned in. "Tell me the truth, Clara. Are they using your land to spy on us? Or worse?" Clara's fists clenched at her sides. She could stay silent. She could lie. But she didn't. "I gave shelter to a man who was dying," she said evenly. "He didn't ask for trouble. He asked for water." The room fell into stunned silence. "And now?" the sheriff asked coldly. "Is he gone?" She hesitated. Then, softly, "No." Gasps. Mrs. Elkins dropped her basket. The sheriff looked like he'd been slapped. "You're telling me he's still out there?" "He's a chief," Clara said, louder now, so everyone could hear. "Not a raider, not a murderer. And he hasn't harmed any of you." The room erupted. Voices rose. Someone shouted, "You brought war to our doorstep. He's the reason we're all on edge. She's siding with the Indians." Clara stood tall. "I'm not siding with anyone. I helped a man because it was the right thing to do." Talbot's jaw tightened. "If they cross that line, if they ride into town, I'll put a bullet in every one of them." Clara's voice dropped. "Then you'll be spilling the first blood, and you'll answer for it." There was something in her tone that made even the sheriff step back. She didn't wait for a reply. She gathered her supplies and walked out, the weight of the town's fear trailing behind her like smoke. Back on her land, Hawk was waiting near the tree line. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. I told them, Clara said simply. Dismounting. They know you're here. He nodded once. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He stepped forward, brushed a lock of hair from her cheek, and looked her in the eyes. Then you are no longer just a widow. She smiled faintly, though her heart raced. What am I now? She whispered. Hawk's voice was low and reverent. You are the woman who stands between peace and war. That night, Hawk built a fire not in hiding, not in the shelter of trees or brush, but right in the open, at the foot of Clara's land where prairie met the trail. The flames danced against the dark, casting golden light over his bare chest and painted arms. His ceremonial markings were fresh, now black streaks across his cheekbones, a red line over his heart, a braided leather band tied around one bicep. He sat like stone, silent and unmoving, facing the ridge that led toward town. Behind him, a dozen of his warriors emerged from the trees, wordless shadows wrapped in blankets and war paint. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Their presence was a message. We are here. We are ready. Clara stood just behind Hawk, arms crossed against the cold, the carved feather pendant pressing against her skin like a heartbeat. You're drawing them out, she murmured. Hawk didn't look at her. Yes, you're not hiding anymore. No, she swallowed. And if they come with guns? I will not let them fire first. His voice was calm, firm, not angry, not vengeful, but final. Clara stepped closer, the firelight flickering in her eyes. You want peace, but peace doesn't sit well with men who carry rifles and fear what they don't understand. They will see I am not alone. He turned to her then, eyes dark and unreadable. He wasn't just talking about his warriors. He meant her. Clara stared at the fire. If I walk down that trail beside you tomorrow, they won't see peace. They'll see betrayal. And if you don't? He asked. She was quiet a moment. Then she answered, then they'll see a coward. The next morning was eerily still. Clara wore a dark wool dress, simple but clean. Around her neck hung the Lakota pendant in full view. She didn't braid her hair, didn't wear paint or beads, but when she stepped outside and saw Hawk waiting for her on horseback, she knew she no longer looked like a settler widow. She looked like a woman who had chosen. Hawk extended a hand, and she took it without hesitation, mounting her own horse and falling into rhythm beside him. Behind them, his warriors rode in silence, not in full war gear, but not unarmed either. Together, they rode slowly toward town, not as invaders, but as emissaries. But still, the tension was alive in the wind. As they approached the town's edge, townsfolk emerged like ghosts, men gripping rifles, women clutching children. Faces pale, breaths tight. Sheriff Talbot stood in the center of the dirt road, shotgun held low but ready. His eyes landed on Clara first, then on Hawk, then on the warriors behind them. What the hell is this? He demanded. Clara raised her chin. This is a man coming to talk, not to fight. He brings warriors, because you bring rifles. Murmurs rippled through the townspeople. Confusion, anger, fear. Hawk dismounted slowly, every motion deliberate. Clara followed. And then he did something no one expected. He placed his bow unstrung on the ground at the sheriff's feet. I do not come for your land, he said. I do not come for your blood. I come to speak for my people and for her. Everyone looked at Clara. She saved me, Hawk continued. When I had nothing but wounds and breath, she gave me her roof, her fire, her food. In return, I offer peace. Talbot stepped forward. You expect us to believe that? A few days ago you were hiding in the hills. I was wounded. Not hiding. And I am not hiding now. Clara stepped in. You wanted the truth, Sheriff. This is it. He's not asking for anything but to be seen as a man, not a threat. The silence was thick. Then, from the crowd, a young voice called out, "You're not afraid?" It was a boy, maybe 10. He looked at Clara, not with suspicion, but awe. She shook her head. "No, I was afraid when I was alone. I'm not anymore." Something shifted in the air. A few rifles lowered. Some eyes softened out. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it wasn't war either. The fragile peace Clara and Hawk fought for didn't last a week. For 5 days, the town held its breath. The Lakota warriors camped quietly along the northern edge of Clara's land, never crossing boundaries. Hawk kept his promise: no raids. No threats, only patience, and Clara? She moved between two worlds. She baked bread for the elderly Mrs. Jensen in town, then returned home to share it with Hawk and his men. She rode her horse into town with dignity now, her head high, even as whispers followed her like dust on the wind. But on the 6th morning, the first shot was fired. It came not from a local, but from a rider sent from Dry Fork, a mining town 30 miles west, where stories of Indian encampments had stirred fear and hatred. He came galloping down the trail, a long rifle strapped across his back and a red bandana around his neck like a warning. Clara heard the thunder of hooves before she saw him. Hawk stepped outside before the rider even stopped. The Lakota chief stood tall, shirtless in the morning light, the bone pendant at his neck catching the sun. The rider pulled his horse short, dust swirling around him. "You're Hawk?" the man asked, voice hard. "I am." The man spit to the side. "Name's Calvin Hunt, from Dry Fork. My mayor says if you and your painted boys don't clear out, there'll be bullets riding the wind." Clara stepped up beside Hawk, her hands balled into fists. "You come alone to threaten us?" she said. The man smirked. "I ain't threatening, ma'am. I'm delivering a promise." Then, without warning, he raised his rifle, firing not at Hawk, but into the sky. A warning shot. Horses reared. The Lakota warriors sprang up from behind the brush, bows drawn instantly. Clara screamed, "No!" Hawk raised one hand, steady and calm. His warriors froze. No arrows loosed, but Clara could see their tension like wolves on a leash. Calvin chuckled. "Thought you had him trained better than that." Hawk stepped forward. "Tell your mayor. I am not the one stirring war. But if war comes, I will not hide my blood." Calvin leaned low in the saddle. "You've got one woman standing between you and a bullet. How long do you think that shield holds?" He wheeled his horse and galloped off laughing. That night, Clara sat by the fire, her hands trembling, though she said nothing. Hawk sat beside her, quiet, watching the flames. "You shouldn't have stepped forward," he said finally. She looked at him. "Then you'd be dead. Was that the better choice?" "No," he admitted softly. She exhaled. "They don't care that you've done nothing wrong. They just see feathers, paint, and the memory of wars they never fought." Hawk looked into the fire. "And yet you stand beside me." "I do," she said. "But what if they come in numbers? What if they don't stop at one warning shot? Then we meet them, not with arrows, with truth." Clara frowned. "Truth doesn't stop bullets." He turned toward her. "But hearts do. If we reach enough hearts, some will lay down there." "Rifles." Clara searched his eyes. "You're still hoping for peace." He nodded. "Because I've seen what war costs. I buried brothers to it." Her voice cracked. "And I buried a husband." The fire snapped between them, and in that silence, something deeper formed, not just between two people, but between two histories, two griefs, and two futures yet unwritten. Next morning, Clara stood in front of the sheriff and every gathered soul in town. She wasn't there to beg. She wasn't there to explain. She was there to warn. "Dry Fork is coming," she said plainly. "And they're not coming to talk." Sheriff Talbot crossed his arms. "Then what are you asking? Don't raise your rifles with theirs. If you do, this becomes your war too. And if we don't? Someone shouted. Clara turned. Then you'll see who really wants blood and who doesn't. That night, the Lakota lit ceremonial fires on the hill, but this time, the town lit lanterns in the windows too. Not everyone, but enough to make Clara's breath catch. Maybe not all hope was lost. The riders came at dawn. Dust clouded the horizon. Before their figures were clear 30 men, mounted and armed, with red bandanas tied to their rifles. They flew no flag, bore no badge of law. These were Dry Fork Vigilantes, and their minds were already made up. Clara stood at the edge of her land, her boots planted deep in the dry soil, Hawk at her side. He wore no shirt, only the patterned sash of his people across his chest. His horse stood silent behind him, as if it too understood the weight of the moment. Sheriff Talbot rode out to meet them first. The townsfolk had voted not to fight, but not to surrender either. We'll hear what the Lakota chief has to say. Talbot told the riders. And if he means peace, you'll leave him in peace. The leader of the Vigilantes, a bearded man named Riggs, barked a bitter laugh. You think peace keeps your town safe? That squaw-loving woman's got you all twisted. Clara stepped forward. Her voice rang out. This land is mine. Not Dry Fork's, not yours. I decide who rides across it, and you're not welcome. You're protecting them over your own kind? I'm protecting my home from fools who don't know a man's heart from the color of his skin. Riggs raised his rifle. Maybe. It's time we burn out the rot. That's when the Lakota warriors stepped out of the brush. Not charging, not yelling. Just present and strong. And beside them? 5 TOWNSMEN. Men from Clara's town. Rifles lowered, but standing in solidarity not. To shoot, but to shield. Clara's breath caught. Hawk nodded once. This is what truth can build. Riggs hesitated now. He hadn't expected resistance from both sides. We've got 30 men, he growled. You think this stops us? You've got 30, Sheriff Talbot said evenly. And I've got the law behind me. You shoot today, you're not soldiers, you're murderers. Every grave you dig will belong to your name. Riggs's hand twitched on the rifle. For one terrible moment, the wind stood still, then a hawk screamed overhead. Sharp, echoing. Riggs cursed under his breath and lowered the gun. We'll remember this, he muttered. You can't protect them forever. He turned his horse and rode off. The others followed. No bloodshed. No war. Just silence left behind. Later, under the same sky where blood nearly spilled, Clara and Hawk sat beside her garden, the wind rustling. The dry corn stalks. They'll come again, Clara whispered. Maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Yes, Hawk said. But they'll come to a people ready to stand, together. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I never thought my life would look like this, that I'd love again, that it would be someone like you. Hawk smiled faintly. Then maybe. We both were wounded for a reason. They said nothing more. The fireflies blinked around them, like tiny stars in the tall grass. And far beyond the fields, where fear had once ruled, hope was being sown.